Nepal in crisis, the constitution about to expire and there are no signs of political agreement about replacing it. What's behind the dangerous stalemate and what is going to happen next? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. Nepal's political leaders have been locked in a series of marathon meetings attempting to avert a crisis that could throw the country into political and civil chaos. When the country's parliament or constitutional assembly was elected in 2008, it was tasked with drawing up a new constitution within 2 years. That period's about to expire and there's no new constitution in view. The government wants to extend the term of the interim constitution, but the opposition says it will only do so if the Prime Minister steps down. Without the support of the other to get a necessary two-thirds majority in Parliament, neither opposition nor government can get its way. Let's begin with this report from Hamish MacDonald in Kathmandu.
Dragging a prayer chariot through the streets, this is a tribute to the rain god. If the tower falls, it's a sign of ominous days ahead. This year, they're watching with added interest. Nepal's government is close to collapse. This ritual, it's believed, will predict what's coming. The peace process here has required some delicate manoeuvring. The country's leaders have struggled with new dance steps after more than 2 centuries being ruled by a king.
This is a monumental change which happens once in generations, where you are transforming the country from a monarchy to a republic, from a unitary state to a federal state, changing the notion of nationalism. And then if you're just calculating your party interests, then you're bound to fail.
The political traffic had been going in the right direction for Nepal. A peace accord, an interim parliament, and plans for a new constitution. But now they're at a crossroad. This country has reached political gridlock. The parties are all effectively travelling in opposite directions. And as this constitutional deadline approaches quickly, the signals are not good. If the Maoists get their way, the current Prime Minister, Madhav Kumar Nepal, will be given the red light and forced to resign. They also want a consensus or national unity government.
This government never wanted to deliver a constitution, so basically the government isn't willing to do anything regarding the peace process.
Crucial to all of this is the future of at least 19,000 Maoist paramilitaries. They've been promised a future role within the National Army, but there's no agreement on how many would be integrated.
We believe in this process. There is no alternative to completing the peace process. That is the ultimate goal.
Across Nepal, that assessment is widely accepted. If no agreement is reached by Friday, the interim parliament, along with all legislation, will ultimately cease to exist. Nepal's newly built political tower could come tumbling down. Hamish MacDonald, Al Jazeera, Kathmandu.
Joining us now are our guests. In London, Kana Shahi, he's chairman of the Progressive Nepalese Society in the UK. Also in London, Lawrence says he's an associate professor of politics at the School of Oriental and African Studies. And in Kathmandu, Santosh Shah, he hosts the Nepali TV program Power Talks and is the editor of Youth Asia magazine. Let's begin with Kana Shahi in London. This is only its second anniversary, and yet the Republic seems to be under real threat.
All of political parties, including, of course, those parties who are in government and, opposition party must work hard together to build, consensus that, they can draft constitution in time. See, so in this case, I do believe, government, must be more responsible to bring all of, political parties, especially main opposition party, so that they can work together. See, otherwise, I think there will be some problem.
Santosh Shah in Kathmandu, doesn't appear that the politicians are getting any closer together. The talks, as yet, not producing any result.
In the last 3 weeks, there has been several talks within the parties and among the parties, and most of the meetings have come without a conclusion. Tomorrow is the deadline of the 2 years of the timeline given for the constitution drafting. Tomorrow they will come out with a consensus, but not that with the drafting of the constitution, but unanimously both the parties in the government and in the opposition will sign for an extension of 6 months, which they can legitimize through voting themselves in. But a larger question will stay whether the people are going to accept that who voted them only for 2 years.
So agreement reached. The opposition had been insistent that there would be no extension unless the Prime Minister stepped down.
The Prime Minister has no reason or has no enough opposition to force him to resign. There was a movement done by the Maoists throughout the country, especially in Kathmandu from May 1st, and that didn't deter the Prime Minister even by an inch. The Prime Minister has lost elections from 2 constituencies for this Constitution Assembly, and at the same time he has been facing a lot of alienation from within his own party, yet he holds a very powerful position in the country. So it is clear that the Prime Minister has certain unnatural power with which he has retained himself, and that's not going to buzz tomorrow in next 24 hours.
Lawrence Sayers, we're dealing here in effect with the unprecedented. We are dealing with a new interim constitution, a republic that is only 2 years old, and talk about a constitution that was supposed to have been written over the past 24 months.
Yes, well, I'm not quite sure that it's unprecedented in Nepalese politics, because Nepalese politics are filled with examples of deadlocks of this type. It's also not unprecedented in other countries, such as Bangladesh, where you have very disparate perspectives on what the solutions would be. So I think that in the case of Nepal, it was implicit. I was there a few weeks ago that there will be an agreement to extend the period by 6 months, which is what has happened. And the problem then becomes is what's going to happen in 6 months. I happen to have very negative or pessimistic perspectives on what is likely to happen in 6 months. Namely, it will be in the same situation that we're in right now, trying to have meetings at the last minute and no resolution in mind. And so my concern would be at what point will the military step in to put an end to this?
Kana Shahi in London, let's put that to you. Is there a threat that the military could step in at some stage?
I don't know, but if that will happen, that will be, honestly, masses, people will not tolerate that one anymore. Any kind of threat, which that threat, threat for the republic, for people's achievement, if any forces, not just, I'm not talking about any particular forces, any kind of forces which threats, which undermines the people's achievement, that kind of threat, will be, challenged by all sorts of means, I think. So I don't think so people will, tolerate that one.
Santa Shah, let's pick up on that particular point. What is the mood in Nepal? How are the people feeling? This is now the 10th government in 10 years. Is there a sense of despair, of desperation, of political disillusion?
Absolutely. People are really nervous and worried right now, as you can see from my own face. We are very nervous because from tomorrow onwards, there is a larger question of uncertainty. And I would also like to touch slightly upon the Nepal army taking over. The probabilities are very less. I mean, it's a chance. There's a chance that it could be an option, but I don't see that as a possibility. Because if we look at the history of Nepal army, they have positioned themselves always neutrally. Even when they were robbed of the title from Royal Nepalese Army to Nepalese Army, they did it very smoothly. There was no opposition from their side. And they're very clear about staying out of the politics. Last year, when the then Prime Minister Prachanda messed up with the whole army issue of ousting the Chief of Army over some mundane reasons, even then the Maoists didn't make any move, which was kind of looked at. So there is no question of people not accepting the army's move because they're not going to move at all.
Lawrence Sayers, I see that you are shaking your head there. Do you not agree with this?
Well, it's not a matter of agreement. It's a matter, I mean, when I speak to individuals in Nepal, of course I can't tell you who, but namely people who are connected to the military, the mood within the military ranks, especially among the top leaders, is to actually take over at some point. They're trying to make a decision as to when that's going to happen. Obviously, right now it would be too premature to do so because the conditions are not intolerable enough for that takeover to be successful. But the chiefs of the army and the armed forces are quite keen to determine when they're likely to take over. Probably in some form of bloodless coup, very similar to what happened a few years ago in Bangladesh. I think that's the model they're looking at, where they would dissolve the government, try to hold an interim place, and then call elections eventually. That's what's going to happen in Nepal, mostly as a result because the Maoists are likely to react very negatively at some point. I mean, they have staged a number of protests, but they're also talking about retraining the cadres. That takes about 6 months or so to actually to bring back fighters to a position where they can fight successfully against the armed forces. So the armed forces are aware of this retraining that is going on, and so at some point they will step in. I mean, I have no doubts about that. It will be unfortunate, but it will happen.
Let's just pause here and put this discussion into context. The 11th hour talks happening in Nepal are the result of years of political upheaval. It all started in 1995 when the Maoists launched a violent campaign aimed at abolishing the monarchy. A decade's conflict ended by what is called the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, or CPA, in 2006. The following year, former Maoist rebels became a part of the political mainstream by joining the interim government. In 2008, the Constituent Assembly was set up with the Maoists winning the bulk of the seats. Monarchy was abolished and Nepal was declared a federal democratic republic. In 2009, though, the Maoists left the government after other parties opposed former rebel fighters joining the National Army. Since then, they've been in the opposition, carrying out strikes, for example, in an attempt to oust the ruling coalition government. Well, let's go to Kana Shahi in London. We've heard talk about the army. What about the situation where you've got up to 20,000 former rebels in various parts of the country? Are they a possible threat in this time of uncertainty?
Let us put it in this way first, yeah. See, first of all, this government, especially, of course, all political forces, they must work, hard to build consensus, national consensus, that, this, peace process can conclude logically. But the government, especially this government, which government, to be honest, if you don't mind, I have to put in this way, yeah. This government is almost like a functionless, useless. It has been nearly 1 year, but this government has not done, has not produced any good result. See, and of course, this government can't decide anything. Who is the boss of this government? Everybody knows. See, so first of all, there should be, this government. I mean, must step down. I think, as being a, Nepalese ordinary citizen, I know no reason because this government, why, this government should hang, in a power. They must step down, and at the same time, they must agree, to build a consensus that, everything, should be decided by consensus. If it's not possible, then at least by 2/3 majority. I mean, consensus means I'm not talking about 100%. I don't think so that will be possible. But at least, to form national unity government, that should be decided by at least 2/3 majority. At the same time, to write a new constitution, there should be in a consensus at least 2/3 majority. Should have so other that's the spirit of interim constitution. See, this government is not it's not ready to agree for that. See.
Well, let me just interrupt you there, Kana Shahi, and put the question to Santosh Shah. Should this government step down, and importantly, would it?
The thing is, they only have 24 hours. In next 24 hours, they need to sit down in the Constitutional Assembly and decide whether they have a drafted constitution or not, which in reality they don't have. And then the question comes what to do with this Constitutional Assembly who is going to complete tomorrow. And as I mentioned earlier, there will be a consensus from both sides in the government and the opposition to extend it by 6 months. And then the question comes how the new government will be formed. There's another issue that nobody has raised so far is if there's a 6 months of extension, what is going to be the size of the government, of the Constitutional Assembly, which is 601 right now. I don't think the government has the fund or the mechanism from Saturday onwards, which basically means if they don't have funds to salarize 601 members and a mechanism to do so, there is a good probability that there will be a downsize in the number. If there's a downsize in the number, the conflict which exists in the country right now will sift inside the assembly of the Constitution as who is going to take an exit, which nobody probably will want to because each one of them are paid more than $300 to $400 per month, which is a huge salary in Nepal.
But to downsize the assembly would mean a constitutional amendment which would require the 2/3 majority, which is unable to be obtained at this particular point. So we're back to square one, aren't we, Santosh Shah?
Exactly. There's a good probability that the number may be downsized to 101 or even lesser. And that's another conflict that I see within the players, within the political players.
Lawrence Shah says we are looking at talking about the improbable, the impossible. Simply, we do not know. To go back to your earlier point that you made, this is just going to extend dispute for 6 months and put it off for 6 months. Do you believe there's no likelihood whatsoever that there will be political movement during this period, just there has not been in the past 24 months?
I think the past is a good predictor of what's going to happen over the next 6 months. Namely, this is a situation where a political resolution is not going to happen. It will be a military resolution, unfortunately. As I was emphatically mentioning before, the military will take over, hopefully not, but by November. If not, the Maoist, former Maoist rebels will rise up at some point, and that was likely to happen within a year of now. So one of the other two situations is the most likely outcome. Most of the problems with former Maoist rebels, most of them, when you speak to them, they really don't want to go back to fighting. It's really not a comfortable life for them. It is preferable to be in peace as they are now. And they're very skeptical of the leadership, of the Maoist leadership, while they were in government. They think that they failed to achieve anything. And so compensating them is one of the key problems right now as well. It's a third problem or fourth. You could add on different types of problems. And most of it is a debate about how much to compensate them, how to compensate them, how many of them to compensate them. But the bottom line is that the military is vehemently opposed to having the Maoist fighters incorporated into the armed forces on the basis of number of things, not the least that the former Maoist insurgents have very low educational level, for instance, and so they would not be able to come into the armed forces to be integrated at the same rank that they were fighting before. The former Maoist insurgents had facility in terms of waging a guerrilla war, but not in a conventional sense to be part of a formal armed forces, where you have to act differently. And so for all these circumstances that we mentioned before, there will be no resolution of anything, of any type, unfortunately, but it is the case. In some countries, like in this one where I live, the liberal Democrats and conservatives, people of different stripes, politically can agree to do these things, to join government, but it's not going to happen in Nepal, unfortunately.
Santosh Shah, we have heard very insistent Lawrence Sayers saying that the military is going to get involved. Having listened to him, are you thinking about changing your mind?
No, because we should not forget that 2 years ago we also appointed the first president of Nepal. So if there's a crisis, the first person or the ultimate person who should respond to this is going to be the president. And now Maoists were in the power when President Yadav was appointed or voted in as the president. So they were very clear about not giving enough executive powers to him because he was earlier former from the opposition party. Now it depends how much power the president wants to exercise or wants to pull in a situation of emergency or in situation of chaos when public sympathy will ultimately go to him. And if we look at his track of 1.5 to 2 years, it's been pretty smooth. He has always stood for national integrity, and people have developed a lot of faith and love for him. And that is the strength that we have not used or even thought of exercising so far. And this may come into action if a situation like that arises. We should not also forget that international community has taken strong interest in Nepal, and they have a strong footing now since then King Gyanendra took power in 2003 and then took absolute power in 2005. That's the time when a lot of international bodies, several governments took a stronger interest in Nepal. They are not going to stay quiet, and they are not quiet even right now. So we should not forget all these other major political and power players that exist besides the current government and the Maoists.
Lawrence,
in addition to that, rule of law in Nepal.
Lawrence Sayers, we heard there the words emergency rule. We heard there the word president perhaps presiding over it. Is the president of the 2-year-old republic powerful enough to be able to maintain a stability should the occasion arise of an emergency period?
No, obviously the response will be no, but he's more powerful than the former prime minister, the Maoist prime minister Prachanda. We have to consider that Nepal is a failed state. So we're talking really about a failed state trying to do something together. The only presence of the state that you can see in Nepal is the military. That's really the only presence that you find of the state credible. The rest is there's no prestige to any of the politicians, not to the level that the former speaker was talking about. People are partial to one ideology or the other, but the one thing that we have to also keep in mind that there was a former king, and the former king has been silent for the most part, but he appears to be in complete denial that he's no longer the king. I am aware that he feels like that, and the military, perhaps, I mean, if my prediction is correct, if and when they take over through a coup, they will most likely go to him and reinstate him in some form, possibly as in a provisional government figure, and that's the situation.
Well,
sadly,
the situation they're very clearly very complicated. A deposed king, an army on the sidelines, and up to 20,000 former rebels in various parts of the country. Many thanks to our guests, Kana Shahi and Lawrence Sayers in London, and Santosh Shah in Kathmandu. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Mike Hanna. Goodbye for now.